Markey here, and in this video I want to do a book review on The Trail of Blood by J.M. Carroll. This is a very famous book in Baptist circles. I first heard about this book just shortly after I got saved and started going to a Baptist church, and this is a book that they promoted, and most Baptist churches I've been at have promoted this book and talked about this book. Outside of Baptist circles, you're probably not going to hear much about this because the purpose of the book is to have a trail of blood from modern day Baptists all the way back to the time of Christ. Now, people that lived 1,000 years ago did not identify themselves as Baptists, but the idea from the book is just various groups of people that were serving God, and the idea is, well, they were Baptists just like we are Baptists. So this book is highly revered and talked about in Baptist circles, but I'll be honest with you, I think it's a horrible book. I would give it about as low of a rating as I possibly could, 1.5 out of 10. And, what's interesting about that is I agree with the general premise that, I'm an independent fundamental Baptist, and I do believe that the teachings of John the Baptist and Jesus and Paul the Apostle are the same teachings I have. And I do believe that there have been groups of people and churches throughout the world from the time of Christ to our modern day. But if you're looking for a book that actually proves that, I don't believe that this is the book. Let me just go through a few things because I know that this is, probably goes against what most Baptists say. But they list various groups of people in this book, and they'll say that these are Baptists. And here's an example. They were robbed of that and called by many other names, sometimes by one and sometimes by another. Montanists, Tertullianists, Novatianists, Paterins, etc. And some, at least because of their practice of rebaptizing those who were baptized in infancy, were referred to as Anabaptists. Other parts of the book he'll mention the Donatists, the Cathari, the Paulicians, the Petrobrucians, the Arnoldists, the Henricians, the Albigenses, and the Waldensians. Now, I do believe that a lot of these groups had very similar beliefs that the average Baptist has today, but actually some of these groups have turned out to just be heretics that are very different. And so this was written and no sources are cited, no doctrinal statements of these groups are given. He just kind of flat out says, hey, you know what, this group is just like the Baptists. And it's like, well, what proof do you have of this? And there's no proof given in this book. So for me personally, reading this book as a Baptist, it doesn't give me more confidence that, hey, you know what, we have this line. It actually does the opposite, because people talk about this book as if case closed, 2 + 3 = 5. There's actually no proof given in this book whatsoever. I think a major mistake that the author is doing is that he's looking at groups of people that were persecuted, and because they're persecuted, this is proof that they are just like us and that they have the truth. But the Bible speaks about being persecuted for righteousness' sake, and there are plenty of groups throughout the world that are being persecuted that are not Bible-believing Christians. The Sikhs have been persecuted by the Muslims through the years. Muslims are being persecuted by the Hindus in India. The Muslims were persecuting the Jews in Jerusalem, and now they're being persecuted by the Jews. Joseph Smith was tar and feathered. I mean, throughout history, there have been plenty of groups that were false believers that were persecuted, and that doesn't prove that they're actually right. And so, it's something I've thought of recently. I wrote a sermon on this that I have not yet preached, but being persecuted does not prove that you're correct. And it's a mistake I see modern day, even with Baptists, where they'll go through a little bit of persecution, and to them that's proof, well, this shows that we're correct. Well, not necessarily, because are you being persecuted for righteousness' sake, or are you being persecuted for your own sins and your own problems? Those are very different things. And so just simply citing groups of people that were persecuted does not prove that they believe the same things as us. It just proves that they were persecuted. But there's really no sources cited. There's really no information to prove that they believe the same thing. And it's just kind of a statement that's made. One of the main keys of this book is that people will use this book to prove that they have a biblical baptism. And what they mean by that is that there's a line all the way back to John the Baptist where they were biblically baptized by someone who was biblically baptized by someone who was biblically baptized by a genuine saved believer, all the way back to John the Baptist. And there's churches, Baptist writers, they'll talk about, are you really a true Baptist church or not. And this is just false doctrine, and it's weird doctrine. You'll hear people say things like, if you're not a Baptist Bride or Church, you're not going to enter into heaven, or you'll be on the outskirts, you won't be on the inner circle. A lot of weird things when the Bible just says, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. I can pretty much guarantee that not a single person has a scriptural baptism going all the way back 2,000 years, because you can't tell me that there hasn't been a heretic over 2,000 years, or somebody got baptized and then they didn't really understand as much, and years later they became a pastor baptizing people, and they don't even realize that the person who baptized them was a heretic and it was a false church. I'm sure that has taken place. And here's the thing, the Bible says that genealogies don't matter. So why are we trying to prove, hey, we're a true church because it's going all the way back to Christ, or our baptism goes all the way back? I am very happy with considering myself a Baptist and an independent fundamental Baptist, because I believe my beliefs line up with the general beliefs of independent fundamental Baptists. But that being said, I don't believe that you can necessarily prove all the way back to the time of Christ. I don't think we have all these doctrinal statements and proof of all these different groups. I certainly do believe there have been believers for 2,000 years and groups of people that met together and were going soul winning and doing the work of God. And I do believe they fell under different names, because in our modern day, we have just these giant churches and names, and worldwide people know them. But I think it's just information that is very, very hard to actually discover. So some of these groups, from my study and understanding, were very similar to Baptists. Some of the groups he brings up are not. Some other problems in the book, he gives very shallow explanations on things. He says, since baptism has been declared to be an agency or means to salvation by some erring churches, then the sooner baptism takes place, the better. Hence arose infant baptism. That's just not correct. Infant baptism comes because they're trying to wash away original sin. So it comes from this belief of original sin. At least that is the doctrine that came out of it, that of their justification for why they do infant baptism. The idea is that a baby is born guilty, which is obviously false. Okay, so they say we need to baptize babies to get rid of their original sin. And of course, that became a tradition and a big practice in churches. But he just gives kind of general explanation that, hey, baptism is really important. It's a means of salvation, so get it done as soon as possible. Well, that isn't really accurate, because there are churches that practice baptism after believing and also have it as a means for salvation, such as, the Church of Christ in the U.S., and they're not doing infant baptism. So I don't really understand the logic. I think he gives a very shallow explanation. There are some wrong doctrines here. He talks about the importance and things that make us Baptists, and I don't agree with everything he says. He says there's two officers. Bishops or pastors. He says those are interchangeable, which they are, representing different roles within the same position. And deacons, they are servants of the church. Well, there's also evangelists. And so I used to be an evangelist before I was ordained as a pastor. So I don't believe that there are only two officers. I believe that there are more. And according to him, this is what you must believe. And if not, you're not really a Baptist. He says it's laws and doctrines, the New Testament and that only. So the New Testament is all that matters. I don't agree with that. I mean, the Old Testament actually matters. That should still be the law of the land, other than the cardinal ordinances that were removed at the resurrection of Jesus. He says absolute religious liberty for all. I'm sorry, but I don't see that in the Bible, that we should have absolute religious liberty. Yes, a person could be an unbeliever, but it doesn't mean that they have a right to worship idols in a country that is actually following God's laws. And so that is actually incorrect. He also speaks well of a lot of false prophets. He speaks about famous reformers, Wycliffe, Huss, Zwingli, Luther, Calvin. He says great leaders in their great battles for Reformation struck Catholicism a staggering blow. So he's against them because he says they're not Baptists, but he speaks well of them. And then he speaks very well of John Wesley and Charles Wesley. And he says these boys were afterwards converted, and genuinely and wonderfully converted. So he speaks well of them, even though they were basically Protestants coming from the Anglican Church, starting the United Methodists. I would not agree with that. So to him, he's basically saying all these Christians are really saved, but we just kind of disagree about various different things. So I think the book's a mess. It's not a book I would promote. I don't think it proves that we trace our lineage back 2,000 years. I do believe that. And that's what's crazy, is that I agree with the premise that there have been groups of people that had very similar beliefs to what I have today, that were genuine believers that did not go by the name Baptist, but they were going out soul winning, standing up for salvation by grace through faith, and teaching eternal security. But the book Trail of Blood does a very bad job of actually proving it. This is not a book I would recommend to anyone. The false doctrine is minor. It's not that big of a deal. But the whole purpose of the book is to prove that, hey, Baptists are the true faith, and he cites no sources. There's nothing to prove what he says, or doctrinal statements or anything. So I would review Trail of Blood as being a very bad book. I don't think it's a very good book. I would not recommend it. I know that is Baptist heresy, what I just said, in a lot of circles, but I'm seeking to give honest reviews, and there are some other books that have a similar idea that I've read that are not as famous, that I've heard about, but I haven't personally read, that are not as famous. And I am seeking to read those, and I'll give reviews for those, because it is a very interesting topic to me. But I do not believe this book actually proves that Baptists can have a trail of blood tracing back 2,000 years. And so I give it maybe 2 out of 10, not a very good rating. Anyways, thank you and God bless.